So we're doing a ground chicken stew, and you just start, and I'm doing the amount for 20 people. So you need 2 ounces of butter, and you throw that in your pot, and you put the pot on medium heat. So the reason I'm doing this stew is, I don't know what the dietitian's told you, but I would imagine she'll tell you that you need to eat a lot of color, different colors, lots of vegetables, lots of fiber, and some meat, but not a lot of meat, that you should be using meat more as a seasoning rather than as the central part of your plate. So it's no more a big steak with a few mushrooms and some French fries, but lots of colorful vegetables, and that's what we're doing today. So the butter is starting to melt, and what I have here is a 1 pound tube of ground chicken. Now, you can get ground chicken in different forms. I buy this one because it is the dark and the light together, and I can get it on sale for $1 a pound. So that's a really good deal. I put them in the freezer, and then I pull them out, and I can cook this up and add it to spaghetti, or I can use it in this. We sometimes do burgers with ground chicken, and that works out as well. The tube is nice because your hands don't have to touch it. You just put it in, and there it goes. And there's some melted butter in the bottom. And then we're just gonna let that kind of cook away and come back to it occasionally. I'm cooking with a flat top heat. I live in the country. We don't have propane or natural gas. So since we're not cooking with gas, it takes a little longer. So one of the things I did was I looked at the cost of this, and I costed the chicken at $4 a pound, because when I was at No Frills the other day, that's what it cost. And then I took the cost of the vegetables, and I didn't cost the salt or something really basic like that. But it came out with the stew and the mashed potatoes. It came to $19.75. So when you think that you could feed 20 people for $20, it's a good deal. And the other thing I thought, I mean, you think, well, what are you making food for 20? Well, I'm gonna have some friends over afterwards, and then we'll have leftovers for the next day. But if you have a spouse and a couple of young kids, you could do this on the weekend, and then you would wind up with food that you could put in the freezer and pull out later in the week, or at the end of the month. And if you had a few dishes like this that the kids like that you could throw together quickly, you're not cooking at the end of the day when you're tired. This isn't a great time of year for potatoes because we're just at the end of the old crop and starting a new crop. So sometimes there's things you have to cut up. I don't like baking potatoes this time of year because sometimes there's funny stuff inside. And when you're cutting up the potatoes, because this is for mash, I cut them fairly small because I want the skins patches to be fairly small, right? And so if you did like a whole potato and you tried to mash it, you'd have these big lumps of skin, and it wouldn't be very nice. And so we've got the potatoes here, and they're in water, and the chicken is starting to cook. We're gonna stir it up a little bit. We're gonna put the potatoes on now. And there's a lot of different thinking about potatoes when you're cooking them. Some people say you can't add the salt until it's boiling, and sometimes for your pot, depending on what you're cooking with, that's a good thing. I always put it in at the beginning because I'm afraid I'll forget later. So I'm just stirring this chicken up here because it's starting to cook. And I don't know how well you can see that because of the steam, but anyway, it's going along very nicely. So I'm putting in 2 tablespoons of salt. It seems like a lot, but it's also 5 pounds of potatoes, and it's 20 people that you're feeding. So it's not too much. So the next thing we're going to need is a pound of onions. So onions, about 3 nice sized onions. I don't have huge hands, but that's kind of a pound. And again, sometimes this time of year, you know, if you're dealing with last year's crop, the outside skin is sometimes a little bit suspect, and so you want to take off maybe an extra layer. Sometimes there's sprouting, and you'll need to pull out the inside. But you want, anyway, all that brown or dried up skin, you want that taken off. So just, I'm sure you've all peeled onions before. Cut off the bottom, cut off the top. Make a cut from the top to the bottom, not too deep. And then pull off that underskin. So you can just do this while the chicken's cooking. If you're cooking with a gas stove and your chicken's like starting to brown a whole lot, or you're worried about it, you can turn it down. This one I've got it up just a bit from medium now, sort of a medium high. And I'm taking off that extra thin stuff because I don't want it. And then I usually look where I cut it and cut down the same place just to cut it in half through the root. And then I put the root away from me. Now I've left the root on there because it holds it together. So when I go to cut up the onion, I put the root at the back. I like to use a little knife for this, and we're going to dice these. And we want them kind of the size of like peas and carrots out of the store. So not too huge. And then we take a bigger knife, or you can use the same knife, and just slice them off like that. And then you lie this bit down when it's hard to hold on to, and you use all of that, and that goes in the compost. So again, you can use a big knife if you'd rather than switching. And as long as you've left the root in the back, it's going to hold together. And this part, when you're holding the onion, you always have your fingers curved, because if you have your fingers like this, you can come down on them. But if your fingers like this, you're not going to throw your shoulder out to come down and your knuckle way up in the air like that. So always keep your fingers curved and keep your thumb behind. So you cut that off just in a nice dice. When it gets a little hard to hold on to, lie it down and then slice this bit up like that. Okay, and that's just something that takes practice, but always get in the habit of doing this anytime you're cutting or holding something. I'm just going to give this another stir because I can hear it. I turned on the wrong burn there. I'm doing well. I do cook at home. So I'd like to turn the fan on, but I'm not going to. Okay, so now this is nice and brown. See that? You got a bit of brown in there. And now when we add the vegetable, the onion to that, we'll add what we've cut so far. There will be moisture come out of the onion, and that will go into the, loosen up what's on the bottom of the pot. So add this right. Now what I'm understanding is that all of you have done your prep ahead of time, so you've got your onions chopped and ready and diced and whatever. So, and that's great. I didn't do that, but it'll work out okay. So again, when you're cutting, you don't want to go all the way through at the back. I almost did on that first cut. You want to just get so it's still holding together, and then there's no danger of it shifting and cutting your finger, and then that's too dangerous. So we're going to lie it down, cut this here, cut this, chop that up, and we're good. And I might start crying before we get this other onion done, but don't worry, I'm okay. You didn't go back far enough there. Something else when you're cutting, just you want to move the knife if you can. So for this, you can't move the knife a whole lot because you're going straight down through. But once I get this part done, just to make it easier, I try to make the knife glide a little bit through the onion. And that helps with making the knife seem sharper. This is a bit soft here, I'm going to throw that out. Okay. So onions go in and they cook for a little bit while we prep the peppers. So if it's sticking on the bottom, do some scraping. If it's a little bit dark, see that? That's okay, that gives color to the gravy. So I've dropped it to medium because we've got a nice bit of color there, and I want the onions now to loosen up the stuff on the bottom, and I'm going to prep my mushrooms. So these are, you can see how big that mushroom is. They're a decent size. I buy the, what are they called? Less than perfect ones, because by the time they're cut up, nobody knows they were less than perfect. They're just big, really, and I think that's kind of nice. So I'm taking the stems out, and I'm going to use the stems. It makes it easier for me to chop the other part out if the stems are there. And again, I'm thinking about, pea and carrot dice, so I'm just going to cut these into little short pieces and throw them in the stew. That's all of my stems. Okay, and then the mushrooms, the same deal. Just slice them across and then the other way. So this isn't something that you have to agonize over. You just chop it up and throw it in. And if one piece is a little bit big, nobody's going to ask for a steak knife. They'll just eat it anyway. So these are cremini mushrooms. You can use white mushrooms. You can use mushrooms that don't look very nice and you think, maybe it's time to throw those out. And as long as they're not like super slimy, you can cut them up and put them in something like this, and the flavor will be amazing. And so I blow my nose and I got rid of the tears and everything else that was running. And finishing these mushrooms now. I find it easier to do with the right side up. You try cutting this, it's rolling around on you, so I always turn them over. And again, it's not, not something you have to agonize over. You just kind of cut them up and there you go. So now these are going in the stew. And if you look in here, those onions are kind of translucent. So that's a good thing. And we're just going to add this. And now we put in 2 tablespoons of garlic puree. So grab that. You can make your own garlic puree, and I do that at camp sometimes, and sometimes by buying peeled garlic. 2 tablespoons this is not something I worry too much about. I usually do a little extra. But there's some garlic in the stew, and then 4 teaspoons of salt and pepper mix. So I have a slide here. It's a tablespoon. There's 2 teaspoons. This is what my salt and pepper mix looks like. I talked about how to make that. It's 1 part to 7 or 8. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 teaspoons. So the salt is really good because the salt, again, will draw out the moisture in your vegetables. So the vegetables are in there. And the reason we're sweating all this is because it concentrates the flavor and makes it nicer. So now we're going to add some herbs. A teaspoon of rosemary. And a teaspoon looks like that. And let's give them a time for water. I think we can do that. And a teaspoon of sage. The sage is a powder, so I'm actually going to measure it. I like sage with chicken. If you were using ground beef, then you might not want to use sage. You might want to use, what would you put with beef? A little more rosemary, probably, or more thyme instead of half a teaspoon of thyme. So there we are, maybe a little more, half a teaspoon of thyme. So that's almost translucent, right? when you're sweating the vegetables, you want them to be a little bit cooked. It concentrates the flavor. That's why we do this. We could cut up everything, add water, and boil it, but it wouldn't have the same flavor. And so when you're sweating this is called sweating, when you're sweating the vegetables like this in with the meat and the fat, that's a really good way to do it. Now, I did say, if you're doing this without meat, what you can do, this turnip is a little more than a pound. It's the smallest one I could get. You can see it's about the size of my fist, so if it's a little smaller, it would have been a pound. We're going to use it anyway, and we'll just put it all in. It's a little bit extra, it doesn't matter. So cut the bottom and the top off, and then I peel this around with the knife. Now, if you don't want to do this, you can cut the turnip in half. And I'll show you a way of doing that in the middle. And then you could slice it down, and then you could pick up each slice and peel it with a paring knife. So as long as you get the turnip peeled, that's what you want to do. This is also how I peel oranges. Cut off the bottom and the top, and then take the knife down and take all the rind off. So the bottom's not quite perfect. So clean that up. That goes in the compost. So if this was a big turnip and I had a knife and I wasn't able to get through there, a friend of mine, E.Y. Kennedy in London, showed me if you put the knife in and get it started and bang it on there like that, so the turnip's falling through the knife, and you basically cut it in half without a lot of effort. So as long as your knife is longer than the turnip, you're good to go there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to slice this into pieces about the size of what the carrots and the peas are going to be in the frozen veg mix. I'm going to take this, lie them down on the flat side, and then I can go this way. I'm going to cut first, holding them together. This is a bit dicey there because I don't want to cut my finger and have it slip. So take that one off, and then going this way, move over to here. Same one this way. Cut the long way first because then there's fewer sticks and it holds together more easily. Thumb is always behind the fingers. Slice this up, same deal, hold them together. If they won't stay stacked for you, don't worry about it, just take them apart and cut them individually or in groups of 2 until you're more comfortable with the full stack. And there's mushrooms in the board, but the mushrooms are in the pot already, so I'm not too worried about contaminating. If it was a different dish, I'd change things. So this, when we're done today, we'll eat this stew on top of the mashed potatoes. And then if you have leftovers, depending on how much you've decided to make, you can put it in a casserole and put the mashed potatoes on top, and then hold that for probably a week. I would think it would keep in your fridge, or you could put it in the freezer for several months. And then pull it out, and it would take, if it's frozen, you'd want to thaw it first, or give it quite a bit of time in the oven. And I don't cook stuff from frozen generally, so I couldn't tell you that. But reheating out of the fridge, it would take a good hour, like maybe even an hour and a half at 350, depending on how deep it is. That's really the determining factor. So our turnips are going in. It's a little more than a pound of turnip. I like turnip. I know it's rutabaga. I grew up calling it turnip. But if you don't like rutabagas, then put in more of the frozen veg, or some fresh green beans or something. I thought I had a bag of peas and carrots in in the freezer downstairs, and when I went to get them, they weren't there, and so I have a mixed vegetable medley that I'm going to use today. But it, you know, as long as you put in lots of vegetables, that's what's important. So this is cooking away here, and you can see how, you know how that was all dark on the bottom, and it's still dark in the middle, but it's coming off because of the water coming out of the vegetables is freeing that up. And so that's what we want. We're concentrating the flavor again, and we've got this cooking along nicely. So, looking at the recipe, the next thing is to put in the peas and carrots, and I don't quite want to do that until that's cooked just a little more. And then we need the water and the flour and the paprika. So, it's here. It says 1700 mils, so I'm going to put 700 in this measure. And then I'm going to put some of that in here. So I think you said about 1.5 cups. And you want more than a cup for sure. And so this is that's about 350 mils. There's almost 400 mils of water. And then here I have stone ground whole wheat flour. So this is for thickening. And if you can't have gluten, you could use some kind of starch, and that would be fine. You wouldn't use nearly as much starch as I'm using, because the flour doesn't thicken as well as cornstarch. But that gets mixed up in this thing. I like to shake it sideways a little bit first so I don't get a lot of flour caked on the top. And then once it looks like it's mixed up, then the spring inside will kind of turn that into a slurry. And then that's what I'm going to use to thicken. Now, my mom grew up having whole wheat flour in her bread. And she'd say to her mother, "Oh, can we not have, white bread like all the other kids in school?" And Grandma would say, "Oh, I'll put some white flour." And so she'd knead a little white flour into the brown dough. And we grew up with white flour as well. But there were some things Mom never used whole wheat flour for. And one was pie crust, and one was thickening gravy and making sauces. And a few years ago at the second reunion, I had whole wheat flour, and I don't know if we'd used all the white flour, or for whatever reason I didn't have it then. And it's a long way to go to get flour, so we decided to make the baked macaroni and cauliflower, baked pasta with cauliflower, using the whole wheat flour to thicken the cheese sauce. And I thought, I don't know how this is going to go, but you know what? Nobody noticed. The sauce was beautiful. It was thick. You could kind of see it, but then by the time you put the breadcrumbs and stuff on top, nobody knew anyway. And it was really lovely. So since then, I've been thickening everything except like butterscotch pie, vanilla pudding, those kinds of things, with whole wheat flour. And so this is whole wheat flour in the stew. And because we're using chicken, it's not going to brown as well as a beef stew. And so having the paprika added and the whole wheat flour will give it a little more color, as well as, we've tried to do some coloring here. So this turnip, get it out so you can see, it's not translucent and the edges haven't softened yet. But from a time point of view, I think we're fine to start adding everything else. It's cooking and it's good. You want it to be a little bit, and that's still pretty hard. I think you better wait. Now, if you taste your turnip and you think, oh my goodness, that's salty, it's okay, because we have a lot of water and a lot more vegetables to add, and that'll all balance out. Over here, I don't think I turned this on high enough or something, because it's not doing much. Okay, so now the bottom of the pot is completely clean. So we're not going to have a white gravy because we've browned the meat. We've used whole wheat flour. We've added mushrooms, and we're putting in some paprika, which can go in with the flour. It can go in now. It's sort of one or the other. have to think about where the paprika is at the moment. It is here. I thought maybe it was up in the cupboard. So paprika is something as well. If you're making chicken gravy or turkey gravy and it's pretty pale, you can add some paprika and it will color it up. It'll help a lot. This is stuck a bit. Sorry about the noise. Yeah, we're there. Okay. So back to, I lost my train of thought there. If you're cooking this without meat and you're on the plant-based diet that doesn't use oil, you can start with water in a pot, take the mushrooms and saute them with the onions and let that color really well, and then carry on from there. And you can just put in a pound of mushrooms instead of 6 ounces, or a large amount. You could use a pound and a half of onions as well. So you're getting the same kind of volume, half a pound each. The mushrooms are cooked down a little more, so you'd want a little more in there of that. But that's how you start that out, and then you just add the vegetables and thicken it up, and there you go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is add the frozen vegetables, and this saves cutting up a lot of carrots, which is, you know, cutting up carrots is kind of boring, and it's difficult because they're round and you're trying to make a dice out of them. So I'll just open this bag and drop in all this in. We have a big iceberg at the beginning, and then we've got that. And then I'm going to add the rest of this 700 mils of water, plus another liter. And I'm going to turn the stove on to maximum because I can do that without burning it at this point. So that's on high. The water's in here, the vegetables are in there. We're stirring it around to break up the iceberg. And that's good. So at this point, I can have the stove. There's another way of thickening this, and that is to take the flour and sprinkle it over the meat. And you can do that, and that works. The fat that's there will, you know, disperse the flour, and you won't get any lumps, and it'll work out really well. And then you add the water and you cook it out. And because the vegetables aren't cooked, if I did that, I would have to stand and stir it the whole time like a cheese sauce, because the flour would start to stick on the bottom of the pot, right? And I'd have to be careful. I probably could take it to medium, but if I put it to maximum, I'd wind up burning it somewhere. So I prefer to brown the meat, cook the vegetables in the water. So at this point, it's more like soup than stew because it's really thin, and there's a lot of stuff in here for soup, but it's pretty straightforward. And what I'm going to do is let that cook until the vegetables are cooked, and then I'll thicken it, and then it's ready to eat, right? So if you look at this, you can see the turnips are a little bit translucent now, right? And these things are still frozen because you can tell that from the color of the thing. But the turnips are about the size. They're a little bit bigger than the carrots. If they were even bigger, it wouldn't matter. You could just cook them a little more before you add the carrots, so everything winds up being cooked the same at the same time. Now the turnips, the other thing is the turnips aren't going to fall apart. If they do get overcooked, they'll still kind of keep their shape, and that's good. So now the garlic mash, we've got the potatoes on there, and I didn't turn them on high enough. They're starting to cook a little bit. We've got the salt in already. And I went to buy leeks today, and they were $4 for 3 leeks, which I thought was a little bit high. Leeks at this time of year are expensive. At Christmas, they're a lot cheaper. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. The kale for a nice big bunch was $1.50. So I weighed the kale at the store. It was 12 ounces, and I thought that's what I need. And so, but I have kale at home, and it's been in the fridge, and it's a little tired. So I pulled out all of the wilted kale that I had, and washed it, and it's here, not looking the best, it's a little tired, but when it goes in the mashed potatoes, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is cut this up, and then when the potatoes are basically cooked, we'll add, so this is a little bit broad. If I were making a salad, I wouldn't bother cutting it like that, but for the mashed potatoes, I like it to be a little bit shorter than the big long string, okay? And then same deal, keep your thumb behind your fingers and just cut that in narrow slices. And away we go. Now, if this were for salad, at one time I used to not put the stems in. I used to take the stem off and then rip it up into pieces, you know, this big, whatever. Now I cut it up and I put the stems in as well. So I'm going to do that with this, but because that's going to take a long time, I'll get a bunch of them together before I cut up the stems completely. So same deal, we've got this lettuce, we've got this kale, it's a little wilted. So I'm going to open it up so I can slice the sides. Pull it back together and then slice this up. Now, why am I putting kale in the mashed potatoes? Well, it's fiber. Kale is one of the best vegetables for you. Not everybody likes it in salad because it requires a lot of chewing. This is something the Dutch do. With this, the English often put Brussels sprouts cooked in with their mashed potatoes. But the skins are on in the potatoes because my mom said most of the vitamins in a potato are under the skin. And so we're getting the vitamins. We're also increasing our fiber. Now, I used to think that the reason you wanted to eat fiber was because it kept you regular. And that's true to a point. But the other thing that they're telling us now is that fiber is there to feed your the microbiome in your lower intestine. So if you're eating a lot of white rice and white flour and white pasta, then you're hungry all the time because your lower intestines are starving for food. So nuts, bran, whole grains, fiber, the fiber in vegetables, all those things will help get your microbiome fed, and then you're not as hungry. And the nice thing about doing a stew like this is then you've got food for after work. You don't have to come home and cook for a long time. It's ready, and then you're not eating processed food, which, you know, I think causes another whole problem in our society. So this would be good. Now, this has not come to a boil yet. It needs to come to a boil, and then it needs to cook the vegetables, and then we're going to thicken it. So I'm going to run downstairs and get the lid for this pot because it's not up here. And Regan is going to, I don't know, show you the flower garden out the window. So we got the lid. Like at Zion Terror, you have to find the lids. They're always hidden. And we're going to carry on cutting up this kale. These are a little narrower, so maybe I'll just cut this one here and then slice across. If you don't, try to get in the habit of this almost a rocking motion with the knife. So it comes and you're sliding through the stuff. Because if you just push down, you're going to get a sore arm after a while. And it's much harder on the knife. So it's better just to get that kind of motion going. And I usually hold the knife like this, but you could hold it like this. Sometimes I change to this depending on what I'm doing. Again, you know, this is not something you'd want to put in a salad, but it saves throwing it out because, you know, the vitamins are still there. Maybe not quite as many as when it was fresh, but it's good, and it's a shame to compost it if you can use it. Food isn't cheap. So again, I'm cutting these narrow. Do one more. Now, if you bought leeks and you wanted to use the leek, what you do is you split the leek top to bottom, and then you wash out the green part because there's usually sand underneath and leave the root on, or leave enough of the root on to hold it together. And then after washing it really carefully down under through the things, then you would slice it up, and maybe about this wide, and that would be good. Again, another really tired piece of kale there, but it's all going to be good. This, I don't like the look of. It's a bit browny yellow, so that's beyond what I want to use. So even though it's, you know, the rest of this has been wilted, but the color has been good, the color's not good there, so we're taking that out. And then these two. Okay. I'm going to pull all my stems back. And I want to cut these as thinly as I can because the kale doesn't take long to cook in the potatoes. We're basically waiting for the potatoes to be cooked. And then we're going to add the kale. And so these stemmy bits, I mean, I could throw them in a stew too, for that matter. That wouldn't hurt. But maybe I'll do that actually. Okay, so there we go. So the kale is all ready to go in with the mashed potatoes. This will have a peak. It's just starting to foam a little bit. See there? Just starting. So we're not really at a bubble. When I stir it, that'll completely stop. And it'll have to start all over again. And so, that's good. The potatoes, we'll just check those with a knife and see how they're doing. My sister's gonna feed her dog, and the dog's gonna start barking any minute now, so. I'm basically cooked. It's a little bit firm, but it's pretty close. Oh, that's really good. You think, how is all that kale gonna go in that little pot? But the reality is there's a lot of air in this little pot, and so it'll fit. I mean, there's a lot of air in the kale. So on this one, I'm just going to add this to here, and that'll cook in there, and that'll be nice too. This is kind of steaming. See the color's changing a little bit there, where it's in the water. I'll just let that cook for a couple of minutes, not a long time. So because I'm using the kale, I'm probably going to use a colander in the sink underneath or something to hold anything that I miss. So I've got this. I want some liquid on the potatoes. And I'll put this in here. So that can sit there and fall around to do what it needs to when I'm ready to drain it. Leave that a little more. It's not quite cooked enough, but it was starting to overflow. So for mashing this, we have a couple different styles of masher. This is not my favorite, but it's my favorite for this because the one that's like has little holes like this and it's flat, the skins kind of just plug it up. So this one will get through the kale and through the skins, and it'll work for mashing that up. So we'll just check this to see how tender, because we do want the kale cooked. Yeah, we'll leave it a little bit more. These are Yukon Gold potatoes. You can use red potatoes. Those are my two favorites for boiling. The russets are lovely if you're doing something in the oven, if you're doing French fries, if you're doing baked potatoes. And they can be mashed, but they're drier, and I don't like them as well for mashed. They take a whole lot more milk when you go to do that. So Yukon Golds are lovely, especially with the leeks, because you have this sort of yellow and green cream color. But the red ones are nice too. I mean, they're good for potato salad, and anytime you're boiling a potato, I like a red potato. And the Yukon Gold, they're good for mashing, but they're also good for potato salad and other things. So you can see now the potatoes are starting to fall apart a bit. Like this is coming away here. The skins, this one's broken up, that one there. And the kale, that's a long string. I don't know how that happened. The kale's good. It's there's a bit of texture to it. I mean, it's not going to be tender, but it's not crunchy, and it tastes really nice. So shut that off. Grab the lid. Grab my gloves. And some of this kale is going to come out, right? That's why the screen is here. And I've got that thing underneath. If you wanted to use milk in this, you can use milk. It's not a problem. Okay, that's good. Now, I didn't drain that thoroughly because I am adding water back to it. There's actually not much kale there. I'm surprised. But we'll dump that out and put that back in. I've got water in the sink there to add to this, and I'm going to add, I think it was 4 ounces of unsalted butter. Yes. So 4 ounces is about like that. Okay, that's 4.5, but we're going to go with it. And then we're also going to put in 3/4 of a teaspoon of white pepper. And I like to put that in before I start mashing so it sort of falls through. And then we're going to put in some garlic powder as well. And that's a tablespoon of garlic powder. Now, why am I using the powder here instead of the puree? They're interchangeable. I seem to prefer the powder in this, and I like to cook anytime I'm cooking, I like to use the puree, but I've used them both at various places. Now take a peek at this. It's boiling now. It's looking nice in the middle. So it's not boiling all over. So we're giving it another stir. And we'll just test a carrot or something here. Just to see. That's not cooked. It has to be cooked, completely cooked the way you want it cooked before you add the flour. So, we're mashing potatoes. Normally I'd put this in the sink to mash, but I got that water in the sink. So again, we've increased the fiber by adding kale. We've increased the vitamins. We've reduced the amount of or the glycemic index, I guess, is something people are talking about these days. White potatoes have a higher glycemic index, and you want to eat things with a lower glycemic index, so things that take longer to release the sugar into your blood. And so the kale does that, the leeks would do the same thing. And it's kind of a nice color. I mean, it's sort of a green potatoes, but if you don't like it, I mean, you could try it for St. Patrick's Day for something different. But anyway, just mash away here. Sharon Grigsby works with me in the kitchen. Sharon, Ron, Elizabeth, there's a few people, but one of the things Sharon says is when she goes out to eat and there aren't lumps in her mashed potatoes, she's worried because she thinks they're instant. So Sharon, there's lumps in these potatoes, I can assure you, and you'd love them if you were here. I hope you're making them at home for yourself. So the butter's gone, and I don't know how to explain this on video. So this is all mashed up. The butter's all mixed through it. Everything's there, and it's fairly dry. Okay, I don't know. You can see these kind of sharp edges. Not sharp edges, but there's lots of points there. It's not creamy. So, and we want it, you always, especially at camp, but especially for large groups, you always want the potatoes really moist, because by the time the last person gets through the line to eat them, if they're like this to start with, they're going to be like dry as anything and they won't be able to swallow them. So I know from experience that this is about 12 ounces. So I'm going to put in about that much, which might be a little over 4 ounces, we'll see. And then I'm going to add that water and stir this up. If you're using russet potatoes, you'll have to add a lot more water because they're really dry. Or you can use milk, you can use cream, whatever you want. But I calculated the calories for this using water, and so I'm sticking to that. If I were doing it at camp and I had the vegan group, we'd just pull out some of the potatoes and kale and just add water and not put in the fat. So now now it's sticking to my fingers. It could still be a little wetter. And you might think, oh dear, I've made that too wet. But, by the time you get to the table, it won't be too wet. Yeah, that feels better now. I mean, it's even easier to mash. So I don't know if you can see, you see how it's smoother. There's less sort of ridges or something, it's almost creamy and much softer in my fingers. That's just amazing. With the garlic and the white pepper and the kale, that's good. So, I'm not going to cover this because the green will lose its color faster. So I'm just going to let it sit here over near the heat, not on the heat, because this holds the heat for quite a while. Now, if you have a look in this pot, this is boiling. Okay, so we'll try carrot again, see how the carrot is. Carrot's cooked. Paprika's in. So all we have to add now is the whole wheat flour, because we've got the sage, the thyme, the rosemary, salt and pepper, the garlic, all of the vegetables. We're shaking this up again just to make sure it's good. And then once you add this, you have to stay with it. It's not going to boil right away, but you've got to stay here and stir it or it'll burn. And burnt flour isn't nearly as nice as browned meat or browned onions. So there are things you can burn, like tomatoes in the oven when you're roasting them, and they're lovely. But burnt flour is not what we want. So that's pretty well out of there. I'm just going to put a little water into rinse it. So that's a little better. We're getting the last of that flour out. It's boiling again, so it's good and hot. And at this point, because that's boiled so well, well, I'm going to wait a minute before I shut it off. I was going to say I'm going to shut it off and let the residual heat cook it, but yeah, I am. I'm going to shut it off now. So there we have it. The stew's ready, and the potatoes are ready, and we'll put the potatoes on our plate, put the stew on top. So what I've calculated for this amount is 5 ounces of potato and 8 ounces of stew for a portion. So I'm going to pull out a plate. We've got a couple of different plates here. This is a big dinner plate. So I'll get it on the scale, get a weight, tear it. Get a stick. So there's 5 1/4. There's 5 ounces. So if it's not the top of your little tinfoil cup, that would be lots of potato, okay? And then we're gonna take this and we're gonna put the stew on top. And it's still boiling even though it's shut off. I think before I lift it, I'm just going to check the seasoning. Make sure it's good. And you should do that as well. Just make sure it's the way you want it. I might put a little more salt. Oh, I think that's good. I'll let the phone ring for a minute, lift this really quickly, and then we'll show you what 8 ounces on top of this looks like. 4, 8. And there we go, a generous serving of vegetables with a bit of meat for flavor and healthy food. So, and then the reverse upside down would work as well if you were doing it as a cottage pie for later. Anyway, enjoy. Thank you.